You are 12 years old, and you do not yet understand that your body is not your own. The year is 1443, and you stand in the great hall of Bletsoe Castle, watching men in velvet and fur discuss your future as if you were livestock at market. Your name is Margaret Beaufort, and though noble blood runs through your veins, you are learning a truth that will haunt you for the rest of your days. Bloodline means nothing when you are born female in a world ruled by men who see daughters as coins to be spent. The rushes beneath your feet smell of mint and rosemary, scattered fresh this morning to mask the winter dampness seeping through stone walls 3 feet thick. But no herb can disguise what is happening here. These men are selling you, and the transaction will be sealed with your flesh. The candles flicker across the faces of lords and bishops who speak in urgent tones about alliances and inheritances, their breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. You pull your woolen cloak tighter, but the chill you feel has nothing to do with the weather. It comes from somewhere deeper, a cold understanding that is settling into your bones like winter frost. Your guardian, William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, gestures toward you with a ringed hand that catches the firelight, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of absolute authority. The girl brings substantial holdings. He announces to the assembled men. Her inheritance includes lands in Somerset, Devon, and Dorset. A marriage alliance now secures those holdings for our cause. You want to ask what cause he means. Whose cause? But 12-year-old girls do not interrupt when powerful men are speaking. Instead, you watch the face of John de la Pole, Suffolk's son, who will become your husband before the month is out. He is perhaps 14, still gangly with youth, his hands too large for his wrists. He glances at you once, quickly, then looks away as if the sight of you embarrasses him. Margaret Beaufort was born into a world where her very existence was both blessing and curse. As the sole heiress of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, she carried in her veins a claim to the English throne that would shape every moment of her life. Every decision made about her, every man who would seek to possess her. The Beaufort line descended from John of Gaunt and his mistress, Catherine Swynford, a love affair legitimized by marriage and royal decree, though the stain of bastardy would follow their descendants like a shadow that could never be scrubbed away. When Margaret was barely 6 months old, her father died, leaving her one of the wealthiest heiresses in England. In the 15th century, this was not a gift but a curse dressed in silk and jewels. Wealthy orphans became wards of the crown, their marriages arranged to serve the political needs of whoever held power, their bodies and fortunes traded between men like shares in a profitable enterprise. The wedding takes place on a February morning when frost covers the ground like scattered bones. Margaret wears deep blue silk, the color of royalty, though the fabric feels foreign against her skin, too heavy, too adult for her child's body. The chapel at Bletsoe is small and cold, with stone walls that seem to absorb all warmth and light. She kneels on the stone floor, her knees already aching through the thin fabric of her dress, and speaks Latin words that will bind her to a boy she barely knows. The marriage is consummated that same night, though both children are too young to understand what is happening to them. Medieval law required consummation to make a marriage valid, but it also recognized that children could not give meaningful consent. This contradiction that a marriage could be both legal and harmful, both blessed by the church and devastating to those involved, would define the nightmare of Margaret's early life. If you're finding yourself drawn into this story of survival and suffering, if you believe these forgotten voices from history deserve to be heard, please consider subscribing. Stories like Margaret's remind us that the struggles women have faced, the battles for agency and dignity, stretch back centuries. Your support helps ensure these voices aren't lost to time. But Margaret's first marriage does not last long. In 1444, John de la Pole dies suddenly of fever, and at 13 years old, Margaret becomes a widow. The news reaches her while she sits in the solar, working on embroidery under the watchful eyes of her attendants. William de la Pole enters without ceremony, his face grave but his eyes calculating in a way that makes her stomach turn. "Your husband is dead," he tells her, his voice carrying no warmth or comfort. Fever took him in the night. Margaret's needle stops mid-stitch, but she does not look up from her work. She has learned that showing emotion in front of powerful men is dangerous. It reveals weakness they can exploit. Within months, arrangements are being made for her next marriage, because a wealthy heiress is never allowed to remain unmarried for long. By 1455, Margaret is 12 years old again, or rather, a different girl is 12, but Margaret remembers. She remembers too well. Now she is 24 and married to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, a man 12 years her senior who has claimed both her inheritance and her body with the full blessing of King Henry VI. Edmund Tudor is no shy boy like her first husband. He is a man who understands power and how to wield it, who knows that Margaret's value lies not in who she is but in what she owns and what she can produce. He needs an heir, a son who will carry both Tudor ambition and Beaufort blood, a son who might one day have a claim to the throne of England itself. Margaret becomes pregnant in the spring of 1456, just after her 13th birthday. She is barely more than a child herself, her body not yet fully developed, not ready for the brutal ordeal of medieval childbirth. But Edmund does not concern himself with such matters. He has done what was required of him, planted his seed in the fertile ground of her inheritance. and now he leaves to attend to military matters in Wales, leaving Margaret alone with her growing terror. She knows, though no one speaks of it openly, that girls her age often die in childbirth. Their bodies are too small, too young, unprepared for the violence of bringing life into the world. She has heard the whispered stories of girls who labored for days before dying in pools of their own blood, of infants stillborn or born alive only to watch their mothers slip away. Edmund Tudor dies of plague in November 1456, never knowing whether his wife will survive childbirth, never meeting the son she carries. Margaret receives the news of his death while heavily pregnant, her belly swollen impossibly large on her tiny frame. She is 13 years old, widowed for the second time, and about to give birth alone in the middle of a brutal Welsh winter. The labor begins on a January night in 1457, at Pembroke Castle, a fortress of cold stone perched on the edge of Wales. Margaret is attended by midwives who exchange worried glances over her small body, who whisper prayers to Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, who know that this girl-child trying to birth a baby is in terrible danger. The labor lasts for hours that blur into an eternity of pain. Margaret's screams echo off the stone walls of Pembroke Castle, raw and animal, the sounds of a body being torn apart from the inside. The midwives work frantically, their hands slick with blood, trying to ease the baby's passage through a birth canal too narrow, through a body too young. At one point, Margaret is certain she is dying. The pain is so intense that death seems almost welcome, a release from the agony that consumes every particle of her being. She thinks of her father, dead before she could know him, of her two husbands, both dead and buried. She wonders if she will join them if this is how her story ends as a footnote in someone else's history. A girl who died trying to produce an heir for men who saw her as nothing more than a vessel. But Margaret does not die. Against all odds, she survives, and on January 28, 1457, she gives birth to a son. They name him Henry, and he is perfect, healthy, whole. But the birth has destroyed something inside Margaret. The damage to her small body is so severe that she will never bear another child. At 13, she has become both mother and permanent invalid, her reproductive capacity exhausted in a single, brutal ordeal. She holds her son in her arms, this tiny creature who has cost her everything, and makes a silent vow. He will survive, he will thrive, and one day he will become king. Margaret Beaufort would spend the next 30 years fighting for her son's claim to the throne, surviving civil war and political intrigue, outlasting rivals and enemies. The girl who was married at 12 and nearly died in childbirth at 13 would become the most powerful woman in England, the mother of Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty. But that power came at a price paid in blood and trauma. In a childhood stolen and a body broken, her story is not one of triumph over adversity, but of survival despite it, of a woman who learned to turn her suffering into strength because she had no other choice. When you think about Margaret Beaufort tonight, remember that she was 12 when they first sold her. Remember that she was 13 when she nearly died, bringing life into a world that had tried to destroy her. And if her story has moved you, if you believe we must remember the cost that women like Margaret paid simply for being born female in the wrong century, please leave a comment below. Where are you listening from, and what part of Margaret's story will stay with you? These voices from the past deserve to be heard, and your engagement ensures they won't be forgotten.